Thank you, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. And I want to honor everyone that's here today to attend this panel. This is going to be a wonderful day. I wanted to just introduce myself. As I've been mentioned, my name is Peter Mendoza, and I'm the Community Program Specialist for the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. I'm also a person that receives services from our system and a person who with a severe disability who has cerebral palsy. What I wanted to first do is just let folks know a little bit about the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. State Council on Developmental Disabilities is established under state and federal law as an independent state agency to ensure that people with developmental disabilities and families receive the services and supports they need. Our philosophy as part of our mission is that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities know best what they need to be independent and participate in their communities. And of course, as a civil rights advocacy organization, we affirm that all people with disabilities and families know what they need to fully participate in their community. The council works to advocate and promote policies and practices that achieve self-determination, independence, productivity, and inclusion in all aspects of community life for Californians with developmental disabilities and their families. I wanted to take a moment as we set the table for what we're going to hear today to just mention that we're having this event just after we celebrated the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's also been 53 years since the passage of the Lynden Developmental Disability Services Act and 58 years since the passage of the Federal Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act. And also 35 years since the passage of the Protection and Advocacy for People with Mental Illness, known as the PAMI Act, and 17 years since the passage of the Mental Health Services Act. And while we honor everyone, including who worked to pass these pieces of important legislation, including public officials, appointed officials, and elected officials, we need to remember that with every law and every victory that was won and every law that was passed, it started with a person with a disability and a family member. While we have much to be thankful for, there is still much to do so that we can have the same opportunities as our brothers and sisters without disabilities. Today, we will hear from leaders, people with disabilities, both self-advocates, family members, about their lived experience. We will hear about their successes, their challenges in getting the services and supports they need to achieve their maximum level of independence. We will hear about rights, advocacy, human rights, disability rights, our civil rights. We will hear about the challenges and accessing our services, especially if you're duly diagnosed with a developmental disability and a mental health related disability. We will hear about their lived experience about how to, as they try to live their best life, moving forward and really living their best life. So I want to honor the panelists for really coming here to tell their personal story. And as we listen to them, it helps us ground us in our work and remember where we came from and why we're here. I should mention there are longer biographies for each panelist available on the Mind Institute website. Okay, so the first leader I'm going to introduce is Nicole Adler. Nicole is an accomplished motivational and equal rights advocate for people with developmental disabilities. And she's also very active in lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transitional and queer and questioning community, an LGBTQ activist. Nicole has a high school diploma and a certificate in communications and public speaking. She is currently pursuing an associate's degree in communication and political science. She is a member of the California State Council since 2014. She serves on the board of a nonprofit supporting people with developmental disabilities. Her vision is to create a world where every person is accepted, respected, included, and regardless of their differences. Okay, so the first question I'm going to ask Nicole, and welcome. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you.
How did you become such a strong self-advocate?
I became an advocate because I am passionate about the LGBTQ community and people with disabilities, and knowing that not everyone can stand up for themselves. So I am. We are human beings, and we should be treated like one. I don't like being babysat or having someone talk down to me. We are equal. I have fire in me because of the world we're living in. We are in the 21st century, and there is not enough change. I really want to see the world to get it right and treat everyone equally. We are all human.
Very well said, Nicole, and very powerful. And you are exactly right. We want to all be accepted for who we are and to be treated equally with respect and dignity. And I really want to honor you for your work on behalf of our community. Okay, the second question I wanted to take a moment to ask you is, as an advocate for people with disabilities, how do you see the relationship between disability and mental health communities?
Both communities, the LGBTQ and in disability communities, we are all humans and we want the same as everyone else. Like falling in love, we need to fight and take real action and have acceptance. One day it's not on one day it's on me, not just my community. I'm a human being with an extra chromosome and I'm gay. We need to have communities, these communities telling their stories, so our society can see we are human and deserve to be treated with dignity and kindness. We need to have a movement similar to the Me Too movement to promote acceptance and point out the injustice. We need our legislators not just to talk and write bills. We need them in our society to follow through and take action. The Olympics has highlighted mental health for athletes. In the media, let's do the same for people with disabilities.
I couldn't agree more, and that's really powerful. And we really need to make sure, especially, folks from all marginalized communities, because we know that people with disabilities are part of every community. And I too want to honor Simone Biles for really helping bring attention to mental health, disabilities and conditions, so that hopefully we can live for a day when all of us are accepted for who we are, because of who we are, not necessarily because of our disability. Okay, so the next question I would like to ask you is, what what are some of the successes and challenges that you've experienced?
Two of the biggest challenges I have faced are people telling me that I am not smart and I will not have a girlfriend. Well, I have proved to them and myself they are wrong. I received my certificate in communications at College of San Mateo. I have 2 classes away from obtaining my associate's degree. It was not easy, but I did it through a lot of hard work and perseverance. I also want to prove them wrong and meet a wonderful woman where we are both choose each other and be in a committed relationship. I know it will happen. I just need to be patient. Another challenge I have faced is the myth. All people with Down syndrome are happy all the time. People with disabilities get depressed and need mental health support, just like everyone else. I know it. I see a therapist. I take medication. I listen to music. Doing all these things is helping me move forward and appreciate my life.
Good. I think you're right on the mark. I can relate, and I'm sure a lot of people here can relate to the things you've said. I too was counted out and went through the special ed system, and I didn't really test very well or in college. And nobody thought until much later that I would go very far. So I really identify. And I know it's been difficult for people, especially now with COVID-19. So I really appreciate you telling your story today. One other question I would like to ask you is, what advice would you give to support people with disabilities and their families navigating various systems, like, for example, the developmental disability system and the mental health system, to live a full life in community?
Just because someone is nonverbal, it doesn't mean they are okay. Be mindful of changes in them and just be more aware. People don't know what's happening inside our brains. People need to be open-minded and talk about mental health like it's an everyday thing. It's part of being a human. We need to talk about it more frequently, make mental health a part of the normal conversation. Love yourself just the way you are. Don't be afraid to tell someone when you're not feeling well. Make sure someone is checking in so no one falls through the cracks. Let's normalize mental health and make it a positive part of the conversation. Don't give up. Don't take no for an answer. Always ask why and fight for your rights all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And it is truer words were never said. We all need to make sure that we check in with one another and make sure that we're okay. And I know that we're going to talk about stigma today, and there's a lot of misinformation about people with mental health disabilities. And we need to do a better job of making sure that we advocate and fight for folks who experience mental health disabilities, along with developmental disabilities. We need to work for acceptance for all. I'm going to move to our next panelist, and I'm so wonderful to welcome Hari Srinivasan. Hari identifies as a minimally speaking autistic student at UC Berkeley. He's part of Phi Beta Kappa psychology. He is a psychology major, and a psychology major, and he minors in disability studies. As a student, he is also a student journalist who has written over 50 articles, both on disability and non-disability topics. He has a column on autism. He served as the first on-speaking president of the student body, Autism Spectrum at California. Hari serves on the Hari serves on the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, which advises federal policies and priorities around autism, and he also serves on several other boards. Hari hopes to bring attention to issues which impact disabled people. He also wants to emphasize the urgency to include and address issues faced by more marginalized groups and that need higher support, that have higher support needs within the autism and larger disability community. Hi, Hari, welcome. Good to have you here. I'm going to ask the first question. How did you become such a strong self-advocate?
Thank you, Peter, and hi, everyone. The nature of our individual disability means we may have to reimagine our idea of traditional advocacy. For example, I don't have the ability to be an orator speaking at protests or march and rallies. My ground reality is that the majority of my time is spent in just barely managing the challenges of my disabilities on myriad fronts. So I think I never actually set out intentionally thinking I am engaging in advocacy activities. Rather, I think of everything that I do as small pebbles that widen the ripples in that pond of change. I will mention just a couple of these tiny pebbles. I teach this class on autism covering topics in myriad areas and across the lifespan. It did involve a good deal of content creation and planning on my part. The impact may not be immediate, but many of the same undergraduate students will go on to becoming the next generation of parents, medical professionals, scientists, policymakers, and other professionals at the decision-making table. It felt so impactful to hear from an international student in Europe who said that this class was influencing her current research work. The actual teaching is done in collaboration with one or more other non-disabled students each semester. With my level of disability support needs, it would have been a tall order to have taken on all the nuances of the actual teaching in a classroom setting on my own. So having little to no speaking skills does not have to limit what you can do. I encourage you all to go and find workarounds where you can. This year, I'm working on my own independent year-long research on emotions in autism, which I hope will help add to that mental health coping toolbox for autistics. If you are a college-going autistic, I hope you will consider participating. The point being, tiny pebbles very much will make a difference. Thank you.
Very well said, Hari. We all have different styles of advocacy. And I really like your analogy of tiny pebbles because that's a good analogy for how we get things done. Okay, so my second question for you today is, as an advocate for people with disabilities, how do you see the relationship between disability and mental health communities? And what is the best way to advance or promote acceptance and rights?
I will start by saying the pandemic factor is just one giant blip. Our mental health issues were there before and will continue long after the pandemic becomes a historical fact in textbooks. I want to highlight 3 issues for autism and mental health specifically. Point 1 is acknowledgement that autistic mental health is a real thing. Currently, everything gets hidden by the label autism. For example, acting out behaviors, apathy, and suicide ideation are prevalent in autistic adults. These are actually signs of clinical depression, but not recognized as depression. The issue could be somatic, with medical comorbidities, co-diagnoses like ADHD and stuff like body schema, where you are always anxious about being able to perform as you are not quite sure where your body is in space and time. So you are already primed for anxiety. So it's a multiple whammy of coping with your body, coping with the stresses of modern life, and also coping with societal attitudes and frustration at inadequate supports and services. Point 2 is coping skills. For example, typical teens have avenues such as confiding in friends, gossiping, teen rebellion against their parents, which are ways to let off steam and seen as acceptable societal behaviors. These avenues are not realistic options for many of us, especially if you are surrounded primarily by older authority caretakers. Other measures we try, such as masking, camouflaging in an attempt to fit in, takes effort and adds to autistic burnout. And yes, non-speakers also engage in masking and camouflaging through the attempts may not be as successful due to issues like oral motor apraxia, and it can take that much extra effort to pull it off and really adds to constant anxiety. The goal is usually to not get people to stare at you in public. Point 3 is access to care. Psychiatric meds or segregation are seen as major fixes. But I heard Dr. Antonio Hardin of the Stanford Autism Clinic say at a conference that psychiatric drugs don't seem to work the same way in autistics. So we need precision meds that actually work on us. On top of that, known research hospitals like UCSF or Stanford Psychiatry will not accept Medicaid when it comes to mental health, and many of us will rely on Medicaid once we age out of our parental insurance. So we need both those standards of care and insurance coverage. Then another point which troubles me is the gatekeeping by professionals. For instance, if you look online at CBT professionals, many will state that they serve high-functioning autistics only. Even research studies seem to focus only on that group. The implication apparently is that other autistics don't have mental health issues, which is ridiculous. There are actually many non-drug therapies used for standalone mental conditions. Examples are ACT, DBT, where human support is extended beyond just the times you are in the therapist's office. At one of my psych classes, a grad student spoke on a CBT version for teens and kids, which sounded like an easy-read version of the main CBT. My immediate thought was this could easily benefit autistics across the board. There is obviously no one-size-fits-all solution. Essentially, there's much work to be done in many areas and miles to go before we sleep.
Thank you, Hari. And again, I think you're really on point with bringing up a lot of the issues that people with disabilities face, and especially in navigating systems, especially when there's multiple systems. Okay, so my next question would be, what are some of the successes and challenges that you've experienced?
Thank you, Peter. I will not sugarcoat it. While I'm very thankful for all the good stuff going on in my life, mental health issues are really the bane of my existence. It's a loop of logical fallacies, worry, and anxiety, and a lot of self-criticism over inability, built on top of years of societal judgments and low expectations. It's exhausting and draining. I want to add that I absolutely don't agree with other autistics online who think that self-injurious behaviors are okay. Why would anyone want to engage in self-harm? CBT in my younger years helped me somewhat, and I have managed to restart recently over Zoom. I do realize it's a long process, but optimistic of the long-term impact in improving my quality of life. I also see a neuropsychiatrist at Stanford. I do want to stress that there is no one-size-fits-all, and we need to have a variety of options available to us, and that we need to tackle mental health on multiple fronts. In terms of successes, key factors for me have been in getting access to communication and access to mainstream education. It's been a team effort, plus a ton of effort and hours on my part, which can be exhausting. Back when I was was in a special education only school and middle school. The school district had not slated me for a high school diploma track, let alone college or UC Berkeley. So stuff like getting mentioned on President Obama's Instagram was just so unbelievably thrilling.
I think what you're talking about today really is, I think it's something that people can really identify with, and you've done so much, and I really appreciate you telling your story. And I really want to say how much I appreciate that you were mentioned on President Obama's Instagram, one of my heroes. The next question I wanted to ask is, what advice would you give people with disabilities and navigating various systems in their community?
Reality on the ground is that marginalized groups are getting left out. They are not getting a seat at the decision-making table. In autism, these are the non-speakers, intellectual disabilities, the ones with a lot of medical comorbidities, aging autistics, and the autistics of color. When voices are left out, it negatively impacts their access to spaces, funding, resources, and policy. There is no justice unless there is justice for all. So we need to make sure these voices are included in conversations around autism and disability. On the advice front, I want to start by saying that just because you have a disability and challenges does not mean that you don't deserve access to a decent quality of life, the one that the non-disabled population takes for granted. So my first piece of advice is, dear disabled peer, no one is an expert on your autism or other disability. Even the experts are still learning. So no one gets to have final say on what your strengths, limitations, and capabilities are. The second piece of advice is that I like to think of myself as possibility, Hari as possibility. I want you all to think of disability as possibility. Only if you think possibility can you see and open the door of opportunity. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to get to speak on this panel.
And again, I really appreciate what you've said. I think your words resonate, that especially we need to make sure everyone has an opportunity to be at the table. And remember, nothing about us without us. Okay, so the next person I'm going to introduce is Felicia Ford. Felicia is an African-American special needs mother who advocates for the rights of special needs families and underrepresented population. She is a proud mother of a 19-year-old lady with developmental disabilities who says, hang on, let me just retake. She is a proud mother of a 19-year-old lady with developmental disabilities who she says is her greatest teacher. And her two adult sons, she also has two adult sons. Felicia has many roles, including being a home health aide, community and mental health worker, advocate with California Black Women Health Project, and a member of her local self-determination advisory committee. Felicia places herself in rooms and spaces reserved for people very unlike herself, to impart a greater understanding of underrepresented communities with the intention of sharing insights and to engage in securing the best possible outcomes for the people she serves. Welcome, Felicia. It's great to have you here.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Peter. Thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction.
And thank you, Felicia. I appreciate all the work you do in our communities. Okay, so I'm going to ask you our first question. How did you become such a strong family advocate?
In the words of my dear friend Hari, I won't sugarcoat it. It came from being frustrated about my daughter's needs not being met. And I had to do something about it because the frustration was building, which causes anxiety. And if I'm anxious or I have anxiety or I'm stressing, then it affects my daughter. So on top of her own disabilities, she gets anxious and frustrated if we're out in public or someone disrespects her or she's marginalized in any capacity. She understands that and it's frustrating. So I had to be her voice. And the other part of that would be, how did you become such a strong family advocate? From just kind of building community and just asking questions of other parents.
Really, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
You know, your words is really important for folks to hear in your personal experience. So my second question is, as an advocate for people with disabilities and families, how do you see the relationship between disability and mental health communities?
For me, I think advocating in a lot of ways, it can be exhausting and it creates, it just creates anxiety and stress. What happens is that my daughter's care can sometimes be extensive. We just don't know how she's going to feel day to day sometimes. And it creates anxiety in her. And she doesn't always have the voice to say, this is bothering me, or I'm stressed out, or I don't want to be in this meeting. And then the behaviors ensue. So her disability causes her stress causes me stress. And if her needs aren't being met, it's just a cycle of disappointment on different levels, whether it's education or being at emergency rooms or not being able to get appointments, or there being waiting lists for therapists. And therapists, traditional therapy does not always work for our population. So it just kind of boiled over. And the best way to promote acceptance, the second part of that, and rights, is that you just stay vocal and very verbal. And every space that you're in should be one that you can create productivity out of, or connections, or understanding. And that's the way to best promote acceptance and rights. Keep speaking about issues, keep talking about them, keep communicating about them, and let people know clearly where you stand and who you support.
That is so true. And I know that sometimes parents, we really need to honor parents who have done so much to advance civil rights in our communities. And it comes out of needing to help a family member or family members. But oftentimes, parents and people with disabilities have to work really hard to advocate. They're often unheard. Professionals don't always like to listen. So it's really important that we hear the voices of parents and people with disabilities. What are some of the successes and challenges you've experienced, and what would you advise to give to support people with disabilities and families?
Challenges are what we all face. Like I just mentioned earlier, long wait lists for medical appointments, triage at emergency rooms, education completely not getting it, and everything being tied back to IEPs, the goals being at best mediocre, just the games that a lot of people play just to get their jobs done, not necessarily done well, but just to get their jobs done, you know. The challenges are being treated with dignity when you're a person of color that has a disability, and it's a physical disability that someone can see. It is just impactful beyond belief. It's just, I see it all the time, and I'm a pretty strong advocate, and I have to do this for my daughter every time we're at an emergency room or a medical appointment. Something comes up, I would say 80 to 90% of the time. And some of the successes I've had is that I started a nonprofit, Leap of Faith Family to Family Support, based on all of the experiences that I had with my daughter, both in education, at regional center, with CCS. Every struggle we've had and every success we had, I'm pouring that into my nonprofit, and just really trying to help families overcome and create a sense of community, because we can be very isolated and self-isolating to the extent that we cause further stress and further anxiety. And I want to say that I've surrounded myself with a lot of really good people. I'm part of Westside Regional Center, so our FRC, Liz Spencer, Linda Landry, Chris Arroyo, people that are just around us that actually really care. Kay Medina, who's a mom from Alta Regional Center, Tracy Evanson from San Gabriel Pomona, Sherry Alvarez from South Central, we just have a really strong network of moms who care and support. If we need anything at the drop of a dime, I can text one of these women and say, oh my gosh, I forgot FACE IEP was today. Can you come? Not only will they come, but they'll bring 5 or 6 other moms with them. And each of us have different areas of specialty. And they're just amazing people that you can always count on to support and to show up. I don't care if you're on a telehealth appointment or you have questions. Lisette Medina Duarte is an awesome mom from East LA Regional Center. Just amazing people that care enough, and we do this and make time for each other. And so just building community and having those folks around you that know a lot more than you do is comforting.
Okay, that's a very excellent advice. So really briefly, how do disparities play out in the world of disability, and what actions can you take to help with this?
Okay, so disparities play out in every arena imaginable. We all know that. What we can do about them, for one thing, I think self-determination is wonderful for those people who it really, really works well for. We always ask for flexibility and support in all of these systems of care. And for me, self-determination, especially for people that are affected by disparity, the Black community, the African-American community, Latino community, Asian community, Native American communities in the DDS system, in the regional center system in California, it's a wonderful way to get those services that maybe you didn't get before, or just didn't know about. And a lot of people are discouraged, in my culture, at least in the Black community, because we feel like we've never gotten our fair shake with services and supports, any of those things. And now this system of self-determination takes a closer look at what the needs are, as opposed to an a la carte of services that you qualify for. It's just a totally different approach. And I think that's one way we can deal with disparities. And again, keep speaking up about it. I don't go to a meeting without mentioning it, because they're very challenging, difficult conversations to have, but we have to have them and be able to move forward, so we're not having this conversation 5 years from now.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the wise words and advice you've given today, and everything you do for our community. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now we're going to move on to our next panelist. It is my pleasure to introduce Lynden Tarr. Lynden is about to start her senior year in high school. She is a student at the Sacramento Theater for Young Professional Conservatory, where she studies acting, voice, and dance. She also enjoys visual arts, including photography, drawing, and animation. Lynden is also an animal lover. She has a dog and 3 cats. She was diagnosed with ADHD and OCD in early 2021. Lynden, it's so great to have you here today. Welcome. And I'm going to ask you my first question is, how did you become such a strong self-advocate?
Well, I think most of the people here are sort of in around the middle or the end even of their self-advocacy journey. They've done amazing things. I sort of just started. So this meeting is my sort of first opportunity to educate on a larger scale, and that's really exciting. And I really hope to have more opportunities like it in the future, so I can become a stronger advocate for people with disabilities, especially with mental health issues, like how I deal with.
Well, I want to really honor you for being here. I
Thank
think
you
you're a
so
strong
much.
self-advocate already, and it's really great that you're here and sharing your story. And that's how I remember years ago I started my advocacy when I was a teenager. And sometimes you just have to get right in and start advocating. And so I really honor you today. I know it takes a lot to come here and tell your story. Okay, so I'm going to ask you my second question. As an advocate for people with disabilities, how do you see the relationship between disability and mental health in the mental health communities?
I think they could sort of, overlap with each other quite a bit because both groups of people are being forced to, they're or forced and like expected to function in a way that they are not built to function, and in a society that was not built for them. It was built for, people who don't have any sort of mental or physical disabilities. And they're sort of like expected to adapt to that, even if they can't. And that sucks.
I hear you, and I think that's something that many folks, particularly young people, can identify with. What advice would you give to promote acceptance and rights?
I think just like on an individual level, just like educate yourself, like watch like interviews from people who have the disability that you want to learn about and that sort of thing. But then also in terms of like a larger scale, just increased accessibility everywhere on all fronts, and adaptability as well, especially with the American healthcare system. It's so expensive that it's very difficult for people, and sometimes like impossible for people to get the help that they need in order to, do things. And then, in terms of like, it's everywhere, like in architecture as well, like, like ramps and stuff like that need to be more out there and accessible for people, because, otherwise it's really difficult for people to like exist in our society.
I couldn't agree more. We teach that disability is part of the natural part of the human experience, and we need to really promote universal design and also make sure that our services and supports are seamless, and so that we have the right to achieve opportunity independence just like everyone else, which actually already is our right. What advice would you give to people to support people with disabilities and advocating various systems to live a full life in community?
If for like families, I'd say, and then for like parents specifically, I'd say like listen to your kids. If your kid, even if like you don't think that they have a disability, like they might, and you should listen to them. I think a lot of parents sort of get this like stage of denial because they feel like guilty about their kid being born with some form of either like mental or physical disability. And because of that, they don't make the effort to help them live with it because they like to pretend that it doesn't exist. But that is so much worse than just accepting the fact that like, hey, your kid's disabled. That's okay. Just like help them out, And I think also a lot of times like a kid will like show symptoms of having, like a mental illness or something, and the parents will be like, oh, they're just being dramatic, or oh, they're just acting out to act out, it's like teen rebellion or whatever. And sometimes maybe it is, but a lot of the times it's not. And like listen to them.
I think listening to young people, especially when they're experiencing behaviors or conditions that may be in fact related to a disability, is so important. That's fine, right? I really appreciate you coming and talking to us today. You did a fabulous job.
Thank you so much.
And I know the audience really appreciate what you had to say. And so I just want to honor you for being here. Thanks again. So the next panelist I'm going to introduce is Gladys Mitchell. Gladys is a parent of a child living with severe mental illness, schizophrenia. Gladys holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration and a Master's in Social Work. Gladys is a retired state of California employee. She has 32 years of service. We thank you for that, Gladys. She currently works for a nonprofit organization which delivers mental health and family support service. Gladys is a school board member for the St. Hope's Public School and a commissioner on the Mental Health Oversight Accountability Commission. Gladys became a mental health advocate in 2014 and has worked tirelessly to help her son receive mental health services. She works to pay it forward for other families and individuals experiencing similar challenges. Welcome, Gladys. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for inviting me.
I'm going to ask our first question. How did you become such a strong self-advocate?
So my perspective, everything I say and do is from a parent's perspective. No degree, no title can ever overshadow that. My perspective is always going to be from the parent's perspective, not just for my son, Jordan, but for all children suffering with disabilities and a mental illness. And so I became involved when my son was diagnosed. I do have a brother who was born with cerebral palsy, and I've always had a sensitivity and an acknowledgement of individuals with some type of disability. But when my son was diagnosed, it really just kind of pushed me into the arena to become an advocate.
I'm using multiple computers and I actually read the question. I should have said, how did you become this strong family advocate? So my apologies. So let me move on to the second question. As an advocate for people with disabilities, how do you see the relationship between disability and mental health communities?
Basically, I see them as needing someone at the table for both, because we live in a society that views people who are different, particularly if it's a physical abnormality or if it's a mental abnormality, someone, lying on the street talking to themselves, we view them as unfortunate. And so with that being said, I look at both communities as needing voices from those of us who have compassion and see them as human beings. And so we have to be a voice and see that the mental health community and the disabled community are not one. The problems are different or the symptoms are different, but often we do have to view them as needing our support, our help. So we can put them together, but they are definitely different.
Right, I think you're quite right. We had to make sure that everyone with a disability is heard, and it may be one community, but also services and support and needs are different. And we have to accept everyone with the abilities they have and give them the service they need that are seamless, whether a person has a disability, intellectual or developmental disability, or a mental health related condition. And I really do honor you for your advocacy. Okay, so the second one, or actually the next question I'm going to ask is, what do you think is the best way to promote acceptance and rights?
So I think the way we do that is we have to be at the table and we have to knock on doors. In my son's case, there was no ability to do that. And then you're talking about an African-American child whom the system looks at. All the data tells us that African-American boys are looked at with a very different lens. And that's a whole nother panel discussion, but we have to be at the table and speak up and advocate for our loved ones who are living with these disabilities.
You are quite right. And we do have to acknowledge implicit bias and also racial bias in our disability delivery systems. That is so important that we conquer those issues as well. Because
And
that
see
does,
them, and I'm sorry, Peter, and see them as human beings and see them as individuals and not see them as a thing or as a problem or through the lens of bias. We have to see them as what they are as children and not necessarily see them as their disability or their mental illness, but we have to humanize individuals before we can adequately serve them.
you are quite right. So for my next question, what are some of the successes and challenges that you've experienced?
I think, again, speaking to the disparity issue, the challenges are helping the system, again, to see a young man. My son was diagnosed at age 14. What is to see him as a child and not this thing. And so the biggest challenge was to tell his story. Since he was unable to do it, often I would read notes that would be something that was not really representative of my child's mental illness. I have to make corrections. So the challenge is for the system of care, as I said earlier, is to humanize the clients that come through the door. My biggest victory, I would say, he's 23 and he just got approved for Alta services. So for me, that is huge. That was life-changing for a 23-year-old living with a severe mental illness and having an intellectual disability and other disabilities. Great success.
And I honor you both for your victory and for all the advocacy that it took to get that done. That is quite an accomplishment. And oftentimes in our work for advocating for people with disabilities, and I'm also a family member, my brother lives with autism and receives services, you really have to count and cherish all the victories as you do advocacy. Okay, so what advice would you give to support people with disabilities navigating various systems? For example, the developmental disabilities in the mental health system, to live a full life in community?
The advice that I would give to family members is, I think someone just mentioned it, the speaker before me, is to number one, acknowledge our loved ones' disability. We can't put them in a closet and hide them. Do not be ashamed of them, but also we have to not take no for an answer from systems of care, and we have to just never give up. There's a lot of great people, good people who want to help our community of mentally challenged individuals and those with disabilities. And so we have to find like-minded people and become team members with those individuals. But to live a really full life, I think we have to just never accept no. We have to keep digging through the system for the appropriate services that meet our loved ones' needs. It's never going to be perfect, but there are a lot of great programs and services and people out there who do want to do the right thing and affect change in our community's lives. So my biggest advice would be never quit trying, never quit looking for support and services. And speaking to people of color, we have to really, really continue to dig and scrape and beg and ask, because the system sees us very different, especially when we do have disabilities and mental health challenges, but never give up. Never give up.
Very true words. True words were never said, and I really want to honor you for being here today. So thank you, Gladys. Really
Thank you, Peter.
you
Thank you
sharing
for
your
having.
story. Okay, now we're gonna move to some questions. And at this time, we're gonna take questions from the audience for our panelists. And so I'm gonna pass the baton over to Abed, who's going to help us facilitate this part of our discussion. Welcome again.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you to all our panelists. That was incredible. We have received some great questions, so I will just try to give you each one and see what our time is like. Nicole, we had a question about whether you have any ideas for how the media can better represent people with developmental disabilities.
Share stories, the big barriers in Hollywood and the media. I'm on a movement right now, working on it. And we need to be out there. We need to be on the news more often. We have to, like, I'm working on a love story with someone with an intellectual disability and being gay or whatever they want to do. I have a friend that is really passionate, just like me. So having resources, like having a friend or just having some connections in the media will help. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so helpful. Thank you. Hari, did you get the questions I emailed to you? Do you, perhaps you have a chance to think about who you feel were your biggest advocates when you were in the school system, and what were the most helpful things they did for you?
Parents, of course, were my constant biggest supporters, and I can't say enough about them. I even have a poem of appreciation titled, "You Never Gave Up on Me." Everyone thinks it has to be just one or two people who are our advocates, but again, it's like pebbles. When a lot of people contribute pebbles, the effect of the ripple is much wider, and it could be different people at different points in your life. At times that help comes from unexpected quarters, it's so much more appreciated. So while accessing and navigating the educational system was difficult and formed a kind of base, it was the outside opportunities that total strangers at that time asked me to do that totally boosted my self-confidence and self-worth, like volunteer opportunities and even an internship. I did not believe before then that I could do an internship, and that was nowhere on my parents' radar either. As a disabled person, you always have doubts and anxiety about your ability to perform. Incidentally, outside opportunities actually help make a stronger case when trying to navigate your basic services and supports on top of how you've come to regard yourself.
Thank you so much, Hari. That's really helpful. Felicia, question for you. Could you talk a little bit about how families can access the self-determination program in California?
Absolutely. It's my favorite topic of late. The first step is that they need to contact their service coordinators. The service coordinators have a vast array of knowledge. We've been talking about this self-determination program for the last 4 to 5 years. That's the first thing they need to do. The first step to take would be to ask your service coordinator for your last 12-month expenditures. And then you take an orientation. Everyone has to have an orientation. Different regional centers will allow you to take them at different regional centers. Some want you to take only their training. And at the end of every training, there's usually a certificate or an email or some type of acknowledgement to say that you've taken that. The next step would be to hire or engage a person-centered planner and or an independent facilitator. This person can be the same. And each regional center, I'm in LA, so South Central, West Side, San Gabe, Lanterman, they all have classes for you to take. They have funds available for coaching. So what I need for families to know out of all of this is that it's new for everyone. It's new for your service coordinators. It is new for the independent facilitators. There are some people that have done it for quite some time, excuse me, but it's new for everyone. Just be patient with it. The flexibility that it gives really works well for some people. Some people may like their traditional situation, or it may be in their best interest, and we don't make a judgment either way. We just want families to make informed choices. So first, reach out to your service coordinators, and they'll guide you along the way. They've got loads of information. DDS has a plethora of information on their websites. And so you don't have to know everything. I've been at this for several years, and I'm on the local advisory committee for Westside Regional Center. We learn at every interaction. So just start looking it up, get connected to some groups, and I think you'll like what it has to offer. If it's not for you, it'll be for someone that you know.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Lynden, people are really inspired by your call for people to trust their teenager. And we're wondering if you had any particular strategies for having adults like teachers and parents, like what are good things to say this mental health challenge is real?
Yeah, I mean, if you know, or so for the parent to say it to the child, sort of like validate what they're going through. Yeah.
How can you get those adults to actually believe you?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, that's the tricky part. I it's something I got, you know, I got lucky, and I have, you know, very supportive parents, but like I have friends who are not in the same boat. And so it's very difficult, and I honestly don't know how you get that to happen. But in terms of you know, in terms of what the parents can do to be like, hey, we believe you, you know, just like say it, just be like, yes, you know, like we believe you, because like it seems like a small thing to be like, yeah, like what you're going through is like valid, and like, you know, like you probably have like something going on, and we can try to work through it together, you know, even if you can't get like actual like, you know, medication or anything like that. Just the validation of like people like believe me, that's so huge, you know. So yeah, just
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you. Gladys, we had someone ask how a parent can become an advocate for other families.
So I think the way you become an advocate is the first point of contact with any individual that's servicing your loved one. You can ask them questions. There are so many advocacy groups out there. Everyone knows about NAMI. And you just ask questions. You ask just what you asked me. I'm not 100% sure, but what I do know, and maybe Felicia can help with this, we just ask questions and we just show up. When's the next meeting? Can I come? And you don't accept no for an answer. You still show up. So you just be involved, and you get involved with like-minded people and groups because you love your loved one. And so you just keep in there fighting and asking questions and showing up. Doctor's appointments, therapy appointments, child and family team meetings, IEPs, and that becomes the way you become an involved advocate.
Thank you. I'm hearing a theme of persistence and not taking no for an answer from all of you. Peter, can I ask you a question? You talked about your parents inspiring you and supporting you to become an advocate and an independent part of the community. Do you have any tips for family members who are trying to support their teen or young adult?
Well, for my parents, and I want to honor my mom who passed away a few years ago from cancer. I think it's really important that, you know, my dad worked a lot to make the city we lived in wheelchair accessible, to put in curb ramps and a lot to make so I can get around. My mom really worked on my school experience, for lack of a better term. I went to a school for the disabled called Marindale. I'm in my 50s. So I came in on the cusp of when they were starting to do what was then called, well, now we call it full inclusion. Now we call it back in the day, we called it going to regular school. And it
Mhm.
was like being on parole because they said if you messed up, it was back to Marindale. So my mom really pushed and advocated for me. And she never took no for an answer, much like you've seen here folks talk about. And the thing you have to know about parents is that oftentimes, and this is for people with disabilities too, the system doesn't want to always hear from us, our parents or people with disabilities. My mom, while she was a strong advocate, sometimes mean things were said about her. She had the door closed. There was a sign up on the door at one of the schools I went to. Beware of this person. You know, if she didn't advocate, I wouldn't be where I am today. You know, I worked hard and did a lot of things on my own, but if it wasn't for the support of family, my family then and my family now, I wouldn't be here.
Great. Thank you all so much. The comments coming in about how wonderful and helpful your stories are for other people who are trying to advocate for themselves and their mental health have just been incredible. And so we really appreciate your being here and sharing your stories with us. Thank you.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with a promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.